Hi, and welcome to the Personal Side of Business podcast, where every business has a story. Today, I'd like to welcome Noe Avila. He owns Noe Avila Therapy. It's a therapeutic office that offers mental health services for the community here in San Diego. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
So, tell us more about what it is you offer to the community and what you do.
So, like I said, my name is Noe Avila. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I've been here in San Diego for the last 15 years. Uh, I guess I'll just tell a little bit about my background. Started working with Tides as my training, and then after finishing my master's, I started working with a school district and recognizing the need for community-based services, especially for mental health for minorities, people of color. So after I started my private practice, Noe Avila Therapy, my goal is continuing to work with families in need of mental health, provide services for individuals, couples, and again, primarily to families with children's disabilities is one of my focus, and overall provide a safe place for the community to come in and learn about different types of issues in mental health, depression, anxiety, um, family of origin issues, and the difficulties it is to access services for a lot of individuals that are minorities. Mental health is still, I feel, very taboo in a lot of first generation or uh, families with people of color, even for generational. If they've been here for generations, mental health is very taboo, depending on their access and supports that they have in the community. So something that I provide is again individual therapy for individuals, and most of my clients that I do have are first generation or people of color. I with that one I do use modalities of Bowen family system, which is family of origin work. I also do a lot of attachment work. And attachment style therapy is recognizing how your family of origin impacts how you view the world and how you connect with others, especially in relationships. In addition to that, I work with families with disabilities, and mostly children on the spectrum. And that came about when I started my career in mental health as an ABA therapist, back in Sacramento, working for the Mind Institute of UC Davis, and being able to work with these children on the spectrum. And you go to the family's home, but a lot of these families, again, don't understand even what that type of support was. And being able to educate them on what autism looks like and what autism is, and then being in these individuals' homes, you become a fly in the wall. So you see how this individual, this child, is taking a lot of the resources, unwillingly for the family system. You see how financially it impacts the family system. You see how, the other siblings are starting to have some sort of resentment because this young child is not getting their needs met due to not being verbal or just having these big outbursts because they don't know how to manage their their um, emotions, or because they're nonverbal, this their emotions are their voice. So when I was working with these families, a lot of Latino families, again, that didn't even speak English, they started asking me a lot about what is autism. So providing these workshops on what is autism, but then also seeing how the mom is depressed, seeing how the other siblings are having these behavior issues because there's sense of resentment towards the parents and towards this child. So seeing how, this child who is an innocent child, right? Is impacting the family system. So through that, I decided to further my education and get my master's in marriage and family therapy, with a focus of child work or child therapy. And I moved back to San Diego, started working for Tides. The Tides, it's YMCA mental health services, and right there I had this amazing supervisor called Bobby Paul, and her modality was Bowen Family Systems. And with Bowen Family Systems, they educate you on how to see the family as a system, but also recognize the multi generational trauma or patterns that get passed on from each generation to each generation, and being able to provide the family, again, work with the family as a whole, not just the individual or not the individual child or another child that might be having behavior issues, but recognizing that what is coming down the generational line and it's impacting the family system. If it's alcohol abuse, if it's physical abuse, if it's sexual abuse, how working as the family and especially working with the parents will, in a way, lessen the anxiety that's going on in the system, and then you see an improvement with the children.
No. And so when you're working with a family, does everyone get involved, or do you work with certain members of the family individually to start to figure out how to kind of deal with everything
Uh,
that's happened?
yeah, so primarily, right, like uh, the family will reach out and say, my son or daughter, they're having these behavior issues, and I want you to talk to them or see how what kind of support you could provide for them. And when I have these young families or the identified client who is as a child, I bring the parents in and I let them know, like, I need to work with the whole family system because your child is just absorbing the anxiety that's going on. So they might, it's called the scapegoat, right? They might be the scapegoat and this child is a problem child, how they're identified. But what I really need to work with is primarily the parents, and what else is going on in the family system. So what I do bring in the family system for a couple sessions. And then with that, I might see the child for it, an individual session and see what they're going through. But primarily when I work with these children, when I was working at the school district, right, as a school-based therapist, my client would be the identified patient, which is, the young client. But for sure, I would always bring in the parents to understand what's going on with them and a little bit about, and do these genograms. They're called genograms, where you understand three generations of the family system. And from there, kind of get a picture of what's really impacting the system. Again, working with a lot of, uh, with the Latinos, there's a lot of machismo that goes on, and in a way, women are secondary citizens in that world. So being able to recognize how cultures and family cultures impact the family system. Also, a big one is religion impacts the family system with working with a lot of minorities, especially with the Latino community. But recognizing, what all factors are impacting these children and why they're behaving this way. Another big issue that I see with first generation clients is that the parents are not available, right? They come to this country seeking a better life for their children. But what doesn't happen, especially in bigger cities, is that both parents are working two jobs. So, and this is where that attachment style comes, that these children do not have secure attachment with the family systems, even though the parents love them, even though the parents give them, shelter, food, and clothing. But most of these individuals or these family systems, the parents are absent due to work. So either one child, the oldest child, has to take over, and it's called perfect parentification, and they start taking over the family system and take a parent role. Or another issue that happens with, especially immigrant families, is that if the child is born here in the United States, they have to take a parent role as well, because then they have to be the translators for the parents. They have to go to the doctor's appointments for those parents. And again, it's a lot of pressure for them to succeed and also, play a big role in how the family functions. So, and all these impact that individual. So there's a lot of challenges, a lot of first generation and immigrant families face here in America. And that's something that, I really focus on helping the family system understand and the parents understand that, you know, this impacts your child. And this is how, we see a lot of rates in first generation family systems that, you know, uh, in big cities that, or even small cities. I grew up in a small little town in Northern California that, uh, friends or my friends or individuals join gangs or turn to drugs and alcohol at an earlier time because, they have this sense of abandonment, because unfortunately the parents are not there.
Do kids in these families that are going through this pressure, are they aware of that there's this sort of underlying pressure for them to help the family get through everything, or are they just like, this is just my job? I don't know any better.
Yeah, yeah, it's becomes normalized, right? It just becomes a thing that that they learn to do, right? We learn to we have to help our family system. We have to help our parents because we also know the struggle and we see the struggles and the hardships that they go through. When I was young, my mom would work sometimes 20 hours a day. She would go to her regular job and then she would go back to the tomato cannery, where she worked for many years and would do a double shifts just to again make more income for our family and save money and to buy a bigger house. Our family was growing, and my dad as well. He would work uh, from 8 hours to 14 hours a day sometimes, just to again to help us survive. I was talking to one of my friends yesterday about the big blocks of cheese, government cheese that we would get, right? And I was like, did you ever have the luxury of having those, right? And what we would do with them, we split them up and put on saltine crackers. And he's like, that's really sad. I was like, well, I actually love them, right? I think the good thing about our community that everybody was on some kind of government assistance. So, you know, we didn't realize that we were financially struggling because our whole community was on the same page. So for us, again, it's this normalization, but there is this big pressure uh, that, especially for the oldest children in the family system, to be a role model. I see this a lot with a lot of my clients that are successful entrepreneurs, doctors, teachers, whatever. That one of the biggest push is to go to college, is to get a um, the reason our parents came here is to for us to have a better life. So there is it is pressure, but it's not put on us. I think a lot of us take it on because this is our role and this is how we pay back our parents. All our all our degrees are not in our offices. They're showcased in my parents' living room.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
do you think that pressure uh, to get those degrees and further give better lives to the families, is that pressure, are people aware of that?
Eh,
Is,
no, like what I'm saying. Like this is, I think, one of the not focused, but I now with me working with individuals, I'm getting a lot of referrals and it's unspoken pressure, right? They don't recognize the impact that it's having on their mental health. Even when they're successful, they still carry a lot of the burden to not just be, the perfect child, right? But also to now to be the role model for the rest of the siblings that you have to succeed. So the oldest children in a lot of immigrant families, they hold a lot of anxiety. They do have self-esteem issues. They have because they feel they have to be perfect, right? So, and just depending on how that trickles down, um, I work with a nonprofit called the California Justice Alliance, and they do amazing work helping unaccompanied minors. I do their compassion fatigue training for the staff, and their first generation, attorneys, and it's um, still the pressure to succeed and make our parents proud and be a good role model for the rest of the siblings, and also being able to provide some financial support to these family systems, right? Even though they're out of it, is still there's a huge uh obligation sense of obligation that it was never put on us, but this is part of our family system that we know the struggles that our parents did. Again, my parents came here at 14, 15, and they started working in the agricultural fields up in the valley. And my mom went to beauty school. That's what she wanted to do. That was her passion, and she did that. My dad went to community college and got some mechanical certifications, and he worked at a oil refinery up in Northern California. And they paid them well, but again, still the sense for us to succeed or to go to college has always been inputted in us. Um, they would let us they would take us to work in the agricultural fields, harvesting tomatoes in the almond fields, like being like, if you don't get your education, this is what your life is going to be. So, there is a lot of pressures to be succeed and not and give back to your parents what they gifted us. And like that's why I said all my siblings' degrees, we don't have them on our home. The diplomas, all of the diplomas are BAs or masters that are just, showcased in my parents' living room because that is the best thing that we could give them. Like, thank you.
That's that's great, right? I think a lot of uh, the parents want to live vicariously through the kids, right? They're like, this is an opportunity for us to
Yeah.
showcase. I mean, I think about my mother's always super proud of my sister and I, what we've accomplished in life, and she's always bragging. And then I always look at it as I was like, man, that wasn't that much. We just went to college, right?
Yeah.
But you look at the fight that someone going to another country, not English is not their first language,
Yeah.
and then achieving all that. And then like, oh, my kids get to they're they're doing more than I could ever dreamed of.
Yeah.
Was that part of your inspiration or your drive to do all this? Was I want to make my parents proud, but I want to have their journey not be all for naught. To really go and push even harder to try to get more things accomplished. Was that something that drove you?
Of course, right? I think, with the new office that I just opened, the mental health collective, um, the the Avila is my family's name, and I highlighted that in that title because I that was my thank you to my parents. This is I wanted to showcase that this is your legacy, and I just really wanted to let them know that because of you, like I have chosen this career because to give back. My parents have always been great people about you know providing services to the community. All my siblings engage in social types of work. One's a OBGYN nurse. My other siblings work for the eligibility department, providing working with families, and now they work for um, the website Cover California Help, helping it become easier for individuals to use, right? That are not computer literate, that are not English speaking. But one of the yes, I think our goals has always to be successful and show my parents that they their work is not in vain, and to continue hopefully making them proud and showing them that because of you all, like I continue to strive and I want to strive to continue this legacy of hard work, and hopefully they're very proud of us, which I know they are. But again, this is why when I chose the name for this new office that I opened, the Avila Mental Health Collective, is not to self-esteem myself and be like this is me, but is to show and continue this legacy of my parents' work.
Yeah, and um, it was that coincidental that all your siblings and you went into sort of like service
Mhm.
oriented fields, trying to help people, or did you guys have a discussion that this is what we all want to do is help other people?
No, I think this is part of a lot of individuals in social work, right? A lot of individuals in social work are people of color because we know our struggles, right? I almost all my friends, they're either teachers, they're psychologists, they are speech therapists as well. But all the community that I grew up with, my friends, we all have some type of social work influence because we understand the struggles that our families went through and the need for providing better supports for these communities and making it more accessible, right? So I think for my family system, it's something not it wasn't ingrained in us, but it's something that again we saw our parents struggle. We saw our parents being attacked because they're Latinos, right? They're Mexican and they worked in the field, right? And having to provide supports for them, right? My older sister or both, or having to go and translate for them sometimes, right? When they were younger. So I think for us, it was just part of our family culture of giving back and supporting the community. But the other part of it is recognizing that the community that we come from, right, being immigrants and first generation, that we want to give back to the community. I think, like I said, I was just talking to my other another colleague, and she's first generation as well, and she's a social worker, and we were talking about why we go into this field is to help people like us and help others, right? But we know the struggles, we know how difficult it is, and if we are able to make a difference, that's amazing. And this is our part of giving back again to our parents and giving back to the world and making everybody feel welcome and feel that they have some type of support.
That's great. And do you feel like there's a big struggle or barrier for you to, when you're trying to help, especially the Latin community, um, sort of get educated on what the needs that they have, and you're trying to come in and help them? Is what is that conversation like? Can you explain it?
Yes, there is, again, there's still like some resistance when uh when I started working for the school district, or especially with ABA, right? There were some families that, especially when it came to the husbands, they and I would show up and be like, "My name is Noe. I'm going to be your child's therapist," and it's like, I was this big guy,
Yeah.
right? I didn't have this many tattoos, but they were like, "No, you're not going to be alone with my wife," right? So there were some family systems that they didn't they I got turned back. But most of the time, it is providing psychoeducation. When I started working in the school district, of course, the parents love their children. They love their children. So whatever services they could get, they're going to come. And most of the time, when I would tell the parents, my name is Noe, I'm a therapist, and it's always like, well, they're not crazy, right? Again, it's depending on your family of origin, your culture, that how they see mental health, that they see it's they're uneducated on how it really works. So it's providing a lot of these uh, psychoeducation of what therapy looks like, and uh, another layer of this is, there's other communities that have a negative relationship with social workers, with schools due to systemic racism, right? So it just depending on what population you're working with, that mental health is still very taboo, and they're also scared of what might happen. Will CPS get involved? Um, will the cops be involved? So depending on there's a community that understands the benefits of mental health, but they also understand the negative consequences or natural consequences. Something comes up like sexual abuse or trauma, that other agencies have to get involved. So depending on the history of that family culture or that culture, there might be resistant to seeking mental health services for their children. Um, Specifically with the Latino community, first generation, a lot of them is that there's nothing wrong with my child. They're not crazy. And again, protecting the family system. But most of the time, what I tell my young clients, and I was like, you're the hero of your family system. And this is how I tell the parents. And once I started providing psychoeducation on, you know, the Bowen family system modality, about like, let's see what's going on in the family system, and they start seeing these changes with their children, then they become open. And something that I tell my clients, especially my young clients or my clients, that therapy is their first time, and it could be 40 years old, right? They could be 16. I let them know you're the hero of your family system, because once the family system starts recognizing that there is changes in the identified client, which is their child, and then there's more buy-in, and then I'm able to talk to the parents and start asking about their family history and their trauma, right? And then like I said, there's no judgment. I'm just going to paint you a picture of why that makes sense.
Yeah.
We're not going to look at the choices that were made, but doesn't this make sense why your child is behaving like this? And taking a lot of um, responsibility off the parents in a way that it doesn't feel shameful for them. So yeah, depending on the family culture. When I was working in Wilson Middle School for the Somalian population, again, the only person that could come would be the men, and so the woman couldn't talk to me. So that was that barrier. So we would have to provide them a female therapist. But if I was only one, I was like, well, this is the only choice you have.
Yeah.
And just providing, again, what mental health is and how it's going to benefit their child.
Now,
And
do you feel like that's a when you got into being a therapist, um, was this sales part ever in your mind? Like you really, or did you think I'm just going to go in there, everyone's going to accept this, and this would
yeah,
be great? Now
yeah.
you're like having to convince people. How to,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
of course, yeah. I'm thinking, wow, if there's a service that's gonna be provided for their child, they're gonna be like, "Yes," right? I want this. But again, just the naiveness of my experience as a first generation Mexican American, right? I grew up in Northern California, where my grandma was 70 years old, would come and make food for us. But my first client here, when I was talking about his grandma, I was like, "Well, tell me about your grandma." He's like, "Oh, she's in jail because she was selling meth." Right? And I was mind blown. And because I had this picture of Coco, the Coco, the movie, that grandma, that was my grandma, but his grandma was 53, right? And his mom was 28 and he was 14, right? So it's a this naiveness for me that I was blown away as, yeah, they're not accepting because they have for sure have trauma with CPS, so that's, but for me, I was like, of course they're going to want the services and I'm relatable to this community because I'm Latino and I know Spanish, but that wasn't the case, right? That was a big eye opener for me, and I was in shock about like I'm working with a very different first generation here, like in these big industrial cities, right?
and I always think that's interesting that you describe it that way because I think in especially in the Latino community, speaking Spanish is opens a door, right? It
Yeah,
starts to make everyone feel comfortable.
yeah,
You already have that, and now you're dealing with this aspect of like, whoa, whoa. Now we're going to these family norms that we're not comfortable with in our culture,
yeah,
and you're gonna have trying to break that.
yeah.
What were some of the things that you did early on in your career that allow y allow you to get into that space a little bit easier? Were there things you were practicing, go, "Okay, Imma try this. This worked. Imma keep doing this."
Well, I think the thing that I felt really connected and was really able to let the parents feel safe is just connect with them. And connect with them being a parent and their love for their child, right? Saying like, look, you you love your child, so this is why you want to explore this. And I want to support your child to get better. So being able to connect with them in that way of like, I know you love your child, so would you give me a chance to show you or provide you some education how this would benefit? And also be very open to them about the consequences of working with a therapist, right? Being very clear that if there's sexual trauma, if there's physical abuse, even if there's elderly abuse or harm to self or others, I have to report this. And CPS will probably get involved. There might be a police officer going to your house. And again, it's very intrusive. It's a very intrusive thing working with a clinician or social worker because here in the United States, of course, we have laws that we have to abide by, and then that might have a negative impact on the family system. So I think being very clear about, this is what it looks like, and this is the pros, and these are the negatives of if any of this comes up. But at the end of the day, is just joining with a parent and saying, if I know you love your child because you're here, and I also know this is scary for you, and and can you trust me that if something does come up, I will let you know first. I'm a very there's just a very direct therapist and individual, and I want to be very transparent that if an issue did come up that I would have to call CPS, I would let them know, but come in and sit with me while I do this call. It's going to be very uncomfortable, but I want them to trust me, right? The main thing is building the sense of trust, positive or negative, that I will show up for you and your family system as genuinely as I can to provide the best service and outcome for your family system. And most of the parents, knowing that fear because there is that love for their child, they're open to it. And that was my foot in the door, that I with working with these family systems. um, so there isn't that much resistance or fear. And like I said, I don't think it's resistance. I think it's just more fear
Yeah.
of their child being taken away, because that's what they know, right? It's all this psychoeducation. No, if CPS steps involved, the only reason they're going to take him if there's severe negligence, severe child abuse. But if this is going on, you'll get more supports actually. And being able to help them understand how to feel safe, I think, was the biggest thing. Safety and trusting me was the biggest thing that I wanted to do to break through that barrier.
Do you talk to both the child and the parent at the same time, or is it different conversations with them just to describe to the child this is what you can be, expecting to happen in the next steps, or is it just a family sitting? And
Usually in the beginning, depending again of the age of the child, right? They're uh, if they're older children, um, I would say like 9 and 10, I bring the family in and both, and let them know, like, look, these are the four things I have to report: sexual abuse, elderly abuse, physical abuse, and self to harm or others. And I literally ask them both, like, I'm going to ask you questions, and I want you to answer these questions with a yes or no. If your child tells me that he got high on Wednesday, is something that I'm going to report to you, mom or dad, right? Or to you, client. And the parents would be like, yes. And I would have to say, unfortunately, I can't. And they're like, well, why not? Right. I was like, because, well, depending on also the age, right,
yeah,
of the child, there's restrictions. But I was like, but because they're not in harm to self or others. If they're having sex, mom and dad, is there something I'm going to report to you? And then I say, they say yes. And then I say no, you know, but then this is why I push also. Well, but this is why it's important for us to engage in family therapy, for you to be involved in this, because I need to know, again, most of the time is, if there's a child engaging in maladaptive behaviors, there's something else going on in the home that is forcing, not forcing, or has encouraged this child to look for their needs outside of the family system. But this is how I really encourage the parents. If you really want to be in the known, then come into family therapy with me, and we could do it once a month, twice a month, depending on the severity. But I have a family that came a few weeks ago, um, a new family that I started working with, and everybody they're thriving, and it doesn't need that much. It's just psychoeducation and holding everybody responsible. Even though my young clients, I think a lot of these young clients feel that they have a lot of privilege now, that this iPhone is mine. And I think because of my ethnicity, like, no, like, it's not. Like, like, I don't coddle a lot of my, even my young ones, right? It's important to place responsibility and agency on yourself, to empower them, and to help the parents understand, like, oh, are you sure you want to give your child an iPhone at 10? Because it opens this big window of of it's mine. And again, I think one of the biggest issues with the younger generations, that you know it's our fault, because we wanted to give them more. Even with my family sister, with my nieces, like, they're privileged. They come from privilege now. We used to give them whatever they want, and now there's a sense of entitlement, right? So being able to recognize, like, you do come from privilege, but that can be taken away, and this is a right. So helping the family, helping restructure the family system in that way as well, is very important. And but have especially have the young clients recognize that you do have agency, and just because you're going to come and tell me that you want your phone back doesn't mean I'm going to tell your mom or parent to give you your phone back. I'll show you how to advocate for yourself. But at the end of the day, I don't get into what happens in the family structure. I don't. make the rules at your house. And that's what I tell the parents as well. I'm just gonna coach you and provide you some insight and education on what modalities work and how to restructure the family system. But I'm not gonna get in there and tell you how to raise your children because that's not my job.
Yeah. And do you think the next generations of children growing up are going to be, um, and their families are going to be more understanding to this just because it's the norm of getting therapy and getting help inside a family is starting to change right
Yes.
over
Yeah.
time. Do you think it's gonna those children are gonna have a better understanding and be more open to it and their families um, a- against what is happening now that you're dealing with?
No, already again, already, here in the United States in the last few decades, mental health is has been highlighted and has been instilled in a lot of these younger generations, right? And so they're open to mental health. It's not a bad thing to go see a therapist, right? There's no shame with that. Um, the negative part of this is that these younger generations do have this lingo of uh what anxiety is and like and depression and I need a mental health day. So being able to kind of swing back and be like, yeah, this is hindering you, but it's not considered trauma,
Yeah.
right? So the good thing that now in I there is a lot of dialogue, and the schema of shame is not so profound in the younger generations. I think they're very open to therapy and what mental health looks like, but I think it still needs these restructuring of what I call not weaponizing your trauma, right? Like, you know, if you didn't get what you wanted that morning, doesn't mean that now you need a mental health day,
Yeah.
right? It's like it's what it's it, they need to learn these coping skills
Yeah.
to be able to also continue uh th- managing their own selves in this world. And I don't work with that really young population, but I have a lot of my friends that have companies, and they find it a struggle with working with the younger generations that they everything for them is very traumatic, and they use the word trauma now for to kind of
Describe
describe
every
what is
yeah.
happening to him, and is like, no, that is not trauma, that was just unfortunate, or you know and I think being able to come back and be like, look, like, yes, um like the words that I don't have my clients use anymore is depression. I'm feeling depressed today, no way. And I was like, well, tell me about that. And I was like, no, I think you're just feeling sad, or you're grieving about this, and this is what clinical depression looks like. I think words do have power. And but I hear very young clients coming in and saying like, no, I have anxiety, right? And it, they might have distress in their life, right? But it's not to the level of like, you have anxiety, because then some of these children do take that label, and that's how they view the world for them now. That I'm an anxious person and I can't function. So I think there has to be some reformulating of how mental health is presented to especially younger children. And when I do work with families, I let them know like, don't really try to keep away saying like, oh, she's anxious, or my child is depressed. You could use oh, do you feel sad today, and understand why they're feeling sad, right? There is levels that there is children that are extremely depressed, extremely anxious due to traumas in their life that are very severe. But I think being able to really, again, provide these younger generations with uh, accurate depictions of what anxiety looks like, and depression looks like. But again, right now we're also living in a world that there is like eco anxiety going on, right? Global anxiety that it's impact adults. So for sure, mental health is pretty acceptable now in our culture, the American culture. And but when I do the genograms with my clients, and we talk about if you're in your 40s and I have a client or 35, and I have a client, and I ask them about their grandparents if they ever talked about depression or anxiety. They're like, no, that was never any type of discussion or verbiage that was used in the family system. A lot of my clients again that are 40 and above, now their parents are using, yes, I might have anxiety or I was depressed. I work, and it's funny because when I work with the family systems, and again, even with clients, I have a client that's 35, and she brought in her mom in to do some family of origin work, and it was great. The mom was really accepting, and I asked the mom after I heard her story, I was all like, "And you never suffered from depression?" And she was in denial, like, "No." And I was like, "Okay, right?" Like, this was a big trauma in your life, and you didn't get out of bed for some days apparently, but you don't
Yeah.
think you were depressed, huh? She's all, no, I was just tired. I was like, okay, right. But you're not going to argue
Right,
with them.
right.
But like, I think now she's open to seeing it because my client tells me, she even got on antidepressants. But again, this sense of denial that we don't get depressed,
Yeah,
it just doesn't happen, especially in with older generation in the Latino world, right? That men do not get depressed.
yeah.
But when I was working at Kaiser as a patient advocate in the first housing crash, there was a plethora of Latino middle-aged men that tried to commit suicide because they couldn't support their families. So it brought them a sense of shame and failure. Um, and then even after they attempted uh, suicide, uh, there was more shame. So again, now they were open to getting mental health services and again just providing psychoeducation about what trauma looks like and without judgment. But doesn't this make sense?
Yeah.
You lost your home and again you lost the American dream and a lot of these people were bamboozled into these great, you know, schemes of you will get you a house and you get a great mortgage and then boom, they were paying triple and double. So,
Do you, if in your ideal world,
mhm.
what would be if someone's not able to get to a therapist for some reason and or get help? What's what are some gauges in your ideal world where someone could tell I am hitting some anxiety, I do have depression, and sort of these elements where they're thinking, oh no, that's just a bad day,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I guess the biggest criteria is how it is impacting three areas of your life, right? How is it impacting your social life? How is it impacting your personal life and your work life? With children, their work life is school. So if you see a big decline in your child's academic functioning, if you're seeing the different stuff with these young generations is it doesn't look like my generation, right? Like, now sending a kid outside is punishment.
Yeah.
So before it was like, are they withdrawing? And now all these kids withdraw because they have technology and gaming is huge and they use your phones to communicate
Right.
with so for these young ones it's very different. But again, if it's impacting your social life, if with anxiety, if you can't manage at work, if things seem overwhelmed, um, and again, if you're isolating with anxiety, if you're irritable and you're lashing out, that's a big indicator. But with depression, again, depression is a big one. If now going to work is difficult and you're calling in sick a lot, if even getting out of bed is hard, you know, you're not engaging in regular hygiene, brushing your teeth, getting ready, and also social isolation is huge. Change in appetite is a big indicator for both. So those are what then in the mental health world is like they're hitting these criterias,
Hmm.
right? So each diagnosis of anxiety has a different criteria that they hit. But there's also these labels or diagnoses of like dysthymia that you just see the world as gray. You're not really over animated when something good happens, and you're just also not really sad if something doesn't happen,
Yeah.
right? So being able to distinguish and uh, how is how this is impacting you. For me, diagnoses aren't that big uh, that I focus on. Of course, I focus on those. They're all for medical reasons. For me, I just looked at the symptomology that's presenting and being able to focus on that, the what kind of symptoms is an individual presenting. And a lot of the times, a lot of individuals are just experiencing senses of stages of grief if they lost a relationship, if they lost a job. But then also that has stages of denial bargaining. And this bargaining stage is, did I do enough? There's a stage of anger towards somebody else, the world, you know, and for sure, there's that sense of sadness, which could lead to depression when you go through the grieving stages. So, recognizing uh, for me is what symptom is my client presenting with, and really not putting a label, but being saying, like, oh, you are sad, or, coming to say to a client, like, look, actually, for me now, you are heading to the symptoms of depression, and like you're meeting the criteria for clinical depression, and being able to provide them that information.
And do you think that's even harder for a minority, let's say a minority male who grows up in a family that doesn't talk about their feelings? Like, there's just
Uh-huh.
all these layers, right? I'm
Yeah.
I'm just thinking in terms of, it, if you were to look, probably start to, generalizing here, but if you start to look into a lot of different cultures, sharing this side of you is not, that's not accepted for a lot,
Yeah.
and I think it's gotta, that's probably a whole nother pressure that someone's dealing with, right?
Yeah.
I'm dealing with these things that are not normal to me right now, and then I can't talk to my dad because he's gonna just tell me to go outside and do something,
Yeah.
and my mother doesn't want to deal with it. Like, what, when you're dealing with families like that, um, do you start to see all these different layers when you're talking to them?
Of course, that's something. I have a lot of in the last recent year. I have had a lot of Latino uh, young females come as clients, and I tell them, like, your parents are gonna hate me,
Yeah.
right? Because it's about putting boundaries and saying no. But with a lot of my first generation males, right, person of color, uh, it is not emphasized to share your feelings, right? Or and even in the American culture, boys don't cry,
Yeah.
right? In my culture is, if you really want to cry, we'll give you a reason to
Yeah.
cry,
Yeah.
right? And it there wasn't a lot of statements as I love you or tell me how you really feel, right? It was just like you get in trouble or something happens and you just shut up, right? Like, why are you crying? And a lot of sometimes I feel that the parents reference their lives, right? Because you don't know what we've been through, so this is nothing, right? There's no sense of empathy, or maybe because again, it's generational thing, it's cultural thing. No one was able to express a feeling, and feelings are connections.
Yeah.
So and when you have connections, that's called empathy. I might not align with your thought, but I for sure could align with if you're feeling frustrated or sad, right? I know what that feeling is. So, and a lot of cultures use acts of service to show their love,
Mm.
right? We don't say I love you, but my dad would for sure, be like, well, let me help you do this, right? Or let me give you this. My mom's acts of service to is like every time again we go home, is like, let me make you what you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you want to eat, right? That's or when she stays at my house, she'll stay. Okay, well, I'm gonna clean your house. I was like, no, mom, I want you to rest. But for her, it's this sense of like active service. This is how I show you love. I'm not gonna tell you, but I will show you. So, like something with my dad that I started doing a few years ago just to test its hypothesis. I started saying, "Hey, okay, Dad, I love you," and he's like, "Okay," right? Kind of brush it off, right?
Yeah.
And then I was like, "Okay, Dad, I love you," and then he's all like, "All right, well, have a good weekend," right?
Like, you can't
Yeah,
do it.
and
You can't do
finally, I was like, "Tell me." He's like, "What?" I was like, "Tell me you love me, Dad." He's all like, "Why do you need to know that if you know I do?" I was like, "Because I still want to hear it." And he's all like, "Why?" Right? Call me. I'll call you later, right? And then there was, and then he started doing like, "Yeah, I do love you," right? He's still not that way, right? But I know if he's pushed to shove, he will say, I love
Yeah.
you. Um, but yeah, of course, depending on your family of culture, you know, it's acts of service that express love, not the word I love you. But it's important.
Yeah. Because
So,
I think for you're talking about your father to have a male who's probably gone through decades
oh, for
from
sure.
his upbringing not having that, and then to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna try to switch this on in like a day. It's
Yeah.
really tough, right? And
Yeah.
I just think of being uh of Asian background, especially Thai. I think of all um just the Asian friends I have, and
Uh-huh.
that's like another that's in the culture too. Like
Yeah.
you start to go deep into it, you're like, no, we didn't hug.
Hmm.
Asian cultures don't hug. They
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah,
It's
dude.
just like, great, good job, keep doing the next thing,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I always it's interesting you tell me this from the Latino culture, because I always saw Latino culture as being really touchy feely, hug stuff.
Uh-huh.
But now you start to peel back layers. You're going through the same thing. I think it's almost every ethnic background.
Yeah. Yeah, no, in the Latino culture, yes, my mom was very loving and kissy, right? But my dad was
Yeah.
not, right? Like, um, uh, he's doing better now, but I think we're the ones also being more vulnerable and really pushing to this. And um, with my siblings, we do tell each other that we love each other, even when we're mad. Um, but yeah, like in the Latino culture, it's a very warm and enmeshed culture, right? Um, but then again, the reason that again it's so enmeshed is because of survival mode, especially when they come to the United States, right? It's a lot of, I think, immigrants have to unite and to survive for the first few decades or years, and this is why we're so close. But then also there's a lot of unhealthy boundaries that are being crossed in these
Yeah.
systems.
Do you think some of that, for especially that crossover generation from other countries, they have to build this sort of fortress around them in order to make it through? Does that make sense? What I'm saying, like, they have to be so strong to be like, I'm bringing a family to the United States of America, that I can't let anything break me because my family depends on
Of
it. Yeah.
course, again, that pressure to survive, right? And I think it just becomes this time that well, you don't have time to sit
Yeah.
down and focus on your sadness, and I think that's why there's big high rates of alcoholism with immigrants or first generation, right? Because there's no time to sit down and think, oh, I feel sad today. You just have to get off work and you go to sleep. A lot of the families here, what I've found different from where I grew up, right? And my parents also worked, my dad would leave at 8 and maybe come home at 7. When we were very young, that's when he was working in the agricultural fields. And so they work all day, you get fed, and then you go to sleep and you have to work the next day, right? And right here in San Diego, because there is such a touristy industry, right? You have a mom working in the hotel, or both parents working in the hotels or food industry. So yeah, they work double shifts,
And
and or one works in the morning, and the other one works at night. So again, now the other parent is responsible for their children. So when do you really have time to sit down and sit with your feelings? Because
yeah.
you don't.
And I'm sure that pressure just keeps building, right? Like,
Of
over,
course.
without knowing,
Of
just
course.
years and years of, oh, I can't let my kids down. I can't let my family down. And I think the Latino culture, um, the the male is just like a workhorse, right? Like,
Yeah.
you just keep working,
Yeah.
just keep working. That's the best way to
Hmm.
take care of my family.
Yeah.
And I, seeing that in so many different cultures, I I wonder, I from what I've heard from you, the US is making that change. But I now start to wonder if other countries are going that way. Do you know anything about that side of things?
Well, like in Mexico, I think mental health is also becoming very um, available. But what I know in Mexico is that again, their mental health wasn't uh, a service for maybe poor people,
Yeah.
right? It's a very social class society, so it was only the rich could afford a psychologist, right, or a therapist. I still don't know that much about how it is in other countries, especially in Mexico, but even a few decades ago, like mental health is now becoming more pronounced and accepted, right? But I still don't think the accessibility for services that are free or um, reasonable, um, sustainable for a family that is not really wealthy or middle class, they have.
'Cause now this becomes sort of a government financial things all
Hmm.
mixed in to try to offer that service.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and do you think right now, with everything that's going on in our United States climate, are families becoming more apprehensive to want to let you come in and say, "Hey, you can"? We might have to get other agencies involved in there. Is it tougher right now?
No, well, in what sense?
Well, just like they're worried if someone from the government's going to come involved in the in our families and start to get information.
Uh-huh. Of course, depending on the population that you work with, right? With these families that are undocumented,
Yeah,
right? Of course, there's this big fear that CPS will come in or something happens and then they get deported,
yeah,
right? But this is another reason why a lot of individual family systems or communities don't reach out
yeah.
to for mental health or any other services because of the fear of this will highlight our family system due to if the parents are undocumented and the consequences are severe. So I do think now with this climate, there's a lot of communities that are fearful of 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 services, of reaching out for services.
Which is another added stress onto it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. But then again, I think there's also a lot of family systems, right? Or communities due to our social pressures, political pressures that they're feeling, that they're more prone to go and seek some type of mental health
Mhm.
support system.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
yeah, and I think this is still why for my passion is to continue to provide free workshops, free mental health services to just the community at large. Just in our country, everybody's suffering from some type of mental health issue, primarily anxiety, right? Social anxiety. Since the pandemic, social anxiety has risen, and since the pandemic, also depression has risen, right? For people staying home, right, from working from home, it's a luxury. But I tell my clients like, yeah, it's a luxury, but it's not a luxury anymore, right? It was convenient, but that convenience also takes you away from social outings, and now you're just at home and you're not really seeing people, and you could get DoorDash delivered, and now you're isolated,
Yeah.
right? And now again, you're watching TV, blah blah blah, or you're on social media all these times. So again, it's this ebb and flow, and uh, but the good thing is that mental services and awareness is more available and accepted now, and and people are seeing the impact of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up like technology, how it affects you, and I think in a good way, like the telehealth side of things
Hmm.
has allowed people to
Yeah.
e- enter that world without being, maybe I didn't want to go into someone's office, but it allows me to have
Oh,
that
for sure.
conversation.
Yeah, I think the telehealth boom since of course, the pandemic has really opened up services widely for everyone, right? This is why you have these big agencies. I work for I'm on paneled on Spring Health, and it's a big agencies that have collective therapists, and you provide in-person supports, or you also provide telehealth.
Yeah,
Due to me having my private practice, depending on the family support, right? I'm working with a family that they have 3 kids, and going to my office is also financially burdening. They have to get a babysitter, and So now it's like, you live by my house. How comfortable do you? Is there a space that I could just go to your
Yeah.
house, right? And I still do family support there. So having my private practice has really helped me broaden my services and what I could do to help families and provide less stressors. Therapy should not be a stressor.
Yeah.
I'm working with a mom with three children, right? And she got there late and she was like, I'm so sorry. And I could tell she was flustered and she's coming in because she has anxiety.
Yeah.
And I was like, look, this is your time, right? Like, this is your time. If you come here 15 minutes late, or if you text me that you can't make it today because you're just burned out, I get it, right? Like, or we could talk if you would like me to do a home visit once in a while. But again, mental health should not be so stressful for individuals. Um, and, uh, of course, uh, there's a lot of insurance now that provide mental health services. There's a lot of EAP programs that provide services that people can really look for.
Yeah.
So there's a big push for mental health services here in the United States that are available to everyone. Um, but again, there's this big fear with Medi-Cal being taken away. I work with a population over 55 that Medi-Cal provides their services through telehealth, and that's one of their biggest fears. And what do you tell these individuals, right? And this is why then I was like, for me, if I have a client and some type of payment doesn't happen, I'll be like, well, I'm not gonna abandon you.
Yeah.
The universe is great. It always gives it back. So for me, abandonment is not abandonment, or termination to any kind of payment is not an
Yeah.
option that's gonna happen with my clients.
Yeah. Once again, another stressor, right?
Yes.
Like I
Yeah.
try to get help, but I'm stressed out about this, not being able to pay.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I feel like you have so much information, and as we wrap up, could you tell about the business side of it briefly? Like what are some of the things that if someone were to want to get into your field,
Mhm.
what are things? How should they start? What are things to look for to help them grow?
Well, again, I think in my field, we have the education part, but I think as understanding the business is huge, right? Like when I started working with you, and you know, I tell people you turn my life upside down in a way that I just never knew that this was possible, because my parents don't there was no education on what business is. Even in my master's program, nobody talks about business, right? So being in as I still step into my next stage of being a business owner, being a private practice owner, right? There's still that I need to know. Like you have helped me, and the San Diego Small Business Imperial County initiative has really provided me a lot of supports on education. And I know you guys provide a plethora of free trainings. Um, and that's something that I want to do this year. But again, before it was like, oh, there is small business loans you could do, or hey, this is what a business plan looks like. And, you know, once again, being I was what, 43 at the time. I'm gonna be 46 now. That's something that was never part of my family culture. About business is nothing that I was taught in school. So being able to have like your services and mentors to help, especially people of color, um, learn about what a tax ID looks like, and different types of businesses. What's the difference between an LLC and an S corp, right? This is how my accountant has educated me, right? And marketing, how that looks like, right? And hey, it's not that hard to get a commercial lease, right? Like when my incident happened that I had to leave abruptly from my old space, I was extreme. I had anxiety attacks. I was having anxiety because I was thinking, man, they're gonna ask all this money, and
Yeah.
I don't know, until you're like, no, no way, it's not that hard, right? Like, look at this, and so it is very challenging, right? And but it's not challenging. Let me reframe that. It's scary.
Yeah.
It's fear based, right? But like I said, working with you, and you helping me understand and provide me education about, look, it's actually not that hard, but because I, I wasn't raised like that. That was never presented in school. And again, not having the time to learn about, how to run a business, it is challenging. But step by step, I'm learning what to do. And, there's still some hiccups and there's still some, you know, maybe bad contracts that like, I was like, oh, I got duped in that one. Right. But being able to start learning, but also having accessibility
Yeah.
to it is also really huge.
And I think that's what people don't realize that enough,
Yeah.
that for especially first generation
Uh-huh.
um, immigrant American families that come over for you to start a business, it's I feel like it's going from like riding a bike to driving a bus, right?
Yeah.
You're just like
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
like, oh, there. What are the steps in between? And your parents are like, I don't know. Like we've just been literally working from 9 to 8 every single day, just trying
No,
to get money.
I agree
You
with you, right? When I met with you, I was in my little like, dinghy, and then you're like, yeah, take this route, and now I'm in the rapids, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah. And
I
all
see
of a
them
sudden it
coming.
just starts happening, and you're like,
Yeah,
okay, I'm sorry, I
yeah.
didn't warn you that.
Yeah. No, but again, but it was exciting, right? And but then at the end of the day, it's so beneficial, right? Like again, I'm where my office is now. It's this grade 3 office suite with a conference room. Um, and I would have never thought that I would be in this space a year and a half ago,
Yeah,
right?
amazing.
And it is amazing. So again, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
you're welcome.
I'm,
You're welcome.
I'm I'm very grateful for you, and for your mentorship. And the unique thing is that we have only met a couple times, but even those couple times, you have propelled me in opening these doors that I wasn't even aware of.
Yeah, I think a lot of times businesses that are in your position end up being so scared and fearful, like you were saying, that it's just like you just need to have that push, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I think that's what happened with you. You, I first time talking to you, I can tell that you had the knowledge, you were super capable, but it was just like this, like, don't worry, like other people have done this, you'll be fine if you just kind of take a couple steps forward and start to see the other side of the door
yeah.
and how that's going to all work out. And I think, but I always think that's comes with a lot of the lack of experience in the business world,
Of
right? It's the
course, of
same thing. The
course.
way I look at the way I dealt with the first business until now is completely different, but I needed to make those mistakes. And I
Yeah,
think that's, but you're doing it in real time. You're like, I don't get to,
yeah,
whatever I make now, this is what
yeah,
happens in the
yeah,
business,
yeah, yeah. No, like it's saying like, yeah, there's many times that like if that metaphor, like I have fallen into the water,
Yeah, yeah,
but the good thing is like, I have my safety
yeah.
supports and, I have my mentors that are
And
like,
you
no,
know how
just,
to swim, and you know how
yeah,
to swim.
yeah,
Yeah,
right. And get back on.
yeah,
And I think that's also the best part of this journey, right? Like I said, being where I am now compared literally to I was 2 years ago, it was a vision that I had, but I just didn't recognize I was going to be like propelled so
yeah,
quickly
yeah,
to it. And again, it was scary. It still is in a way, right? Because now there's more things I have to really learn if I want to take employees on and taxes and
yeah,
marketing,
yeah,
right? But I'm really excited.
yeah.
I'm really excited, and I that is one of the other areas of workshops that I want to do for is mostly again for um, clinicians to be like, look, it's hard work, right? It's hard work. Having your business is hard work because sometimes you are working 16 hours a day, but it's yours, so there's a difference, right? Like you know now I'm very time means a lot.
Yeah.
I'm if I go to your party on a Saturday, that means I really like you because in my head I was like, I just lost this much money,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. It's
So time and is very valuable to me,
yeah,
right? And how I look at business and time is and being intentional with my time and how I take care of myself and my value systems have really changed being a business owner and having that education of what it takes a business to run,
Yeah.
right? And of course, the first 4 years is a lot of work, but thanks to my culture, my family culture, like, we're hard workers, right? Like, so, and again, seeing how this makes my parents happy and
Yeah.
is also worth the while, right? Being able to be the first business owner in my family system is also great.
Yeah.
But all my family siblings are also extremely uh, career oriented and successful in their professions.
Yeah.
So it's just been a great experience overall.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a way to end this. I love it. If Noe, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Yes, they could find me at my website at noeavilatherapy.com. I think that's the best one. They could also reach me at noeavilatherapy.com as well. And those are the best places. They could look me up at Psychology Today and just look up Noe Avila Therapy. Is another form that they could contact me as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being guests on the podcast. And I hope that listeners out there enjoy. And it was great knowledge today. And we look forward to having you in the next episode.
Thank you.